Go, Claire.
Hello, and welcome to Parenting Beyond Belief. This is the pilot episode number 4 of season 1. My name is Clare Wuellner, and joining me today are Dale McGowan and Janet Heimlich. Can you all say hello?
Hello, good to be here.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
They are calling in remotely, and I will tell you more about them in just a little bit. The Parenting Beyond Belief production is from the Atheist Community of Austin. This is a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to the separation of government and religion and the promotion of positive atheist culture. The show was named after the book, Parenting Beyond Belief, that Dale McGowan wrote and edited. And he also wrote and edited Raising Free Thinkers, a practical guide for parenting beyond belief. And I have to say personally that if it hadn't been for those 2 books and the seminars that I went to that he gave here in Austin, I would have had a much harder time raising my children here in the South. I don't think it would have been a problem if I'd stayed in Iowa where I lived, but here in Texas, it was definitely an issue. And then Jan Heimlich wrote the book Breaking Their Will, which introduced me to the most serious aspect of how religion impacts children, has an impact on children. Sorry, I messed that one up. She talks about how the worst of religion can be used to really damage children, and we all know people who have had various degrees of trauma inflicted on us by religion, and well-meaning parents and that sort of thing. So, do either of you have anything from the news that you would like to talk about? Jan, I think you mentioned something about the Texas Supreme Court case that's going on.
Yeah, I started a nonprofit organization in 2012 called the Child Friendly Faith Project. And what we do is we look for really great things that some religious organizations are doing for kids, and then we look at when things really go downhill. And in addition to that, we follow cases in which people's idea of religion is so skewed that they kind of give a pass to religious organizations, institutions, communities that may be harming children, but are not held accountable because they are faith-based or somehow affiliated with religious doctrine or belief system. And we were shocked to have discovered a case that is currently in front of the Texas Supreme Court. It involves a prestigious private Christian school called the Episcopal School of Dallas. And this school ended up expelling a child wrongly. It was for smoking pot, but the drug test was negative. I mean, all the facts really, if they had been looked at, would have been found to have been a wrong expulsion. But what happened was the school, in taking it to did an end run around the trial court, went right to the Fifth Circuit of Appeals, the appellate court, and said, we want to apply something called the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine. And that should give the Episcopal School of Dallas the right to make any decision they want that impacts children's lives because it's faith-based. The appellate court said, that sounds great. And they sided with the defendant. And I should say they were sued by the parent of the child, who's John Doe. And then it was appealed to the Texas Supreme Court, which unfortunately about 3 months ago refused to hear the case. It's now being requested that they rehear it. But this decision or failure to hear the case, and they should decide fairly soon on that, could basically take away a parent's right to sue a faith-based institution, even if there are allegations of abuse, such as physical abuse due to certain kinds of discipline, failure to remove a teacher who is sexually abusing a child. All those things would essentially not be allowed to be brought into a civil court. They can still file criminal charges, but parents would not be able to sue. And I just wrote an op-ed on this in the Houston Chronicle. But this looks like we're seeing the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine being tried now in other types of cases involving children in Texas and around the country. So we're really concerned about this one.
Yeah, that's very serious. There was a while back someone who sued over having to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and it needs to happen. That lawsuit needs to be brought again in Texas, because my children are required to stand unless they have a note from me, which goes against federal law, right? And so they could stand. It would make, without me giving them a note, and it would make a hell of a noise. And what does it take to sue like that? It must be very expensive. I wish somebody else with more money than I could do it, because it needs to happen. They should be able to sit if they want instead of standing. Did I say standing instead? I said the wrong thing. All right. Well, Dale, anything from you?
Well, I'm more involved in kind of the big picture stuff now.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the cultural shift that's going on, and how the appearance is the opposite of the reality right now. We have every reason to believe on the surface that evangelical Christianity is on the rise, that it's reaching a new zenith of cultural control and domination, and their politics all the way up to the Oval Office. But when you look at the demographics that are unfolding, and a lot of the really good research that's been done recently in terms of generational differences, you can see that this really represents a kind of stab from the grave for evangelical Christianity in the United States. And the millennial population, and then coming up behind them, Generation Z, just entering the polling populations, are abandoning traditional religion in such droves. It's way beyond what I expected. I knew that there was this demographic shift that has been going on for a couple of generations, but it's accelerating so much more rapidly than I expected, and I think that most people did. So it's just interesting to watch that happen, to see it reflected in my own kids, and to see the particular kind of secularism that they're embracing. It's different for each of them. 3 kids, 3 different approaches. But I think each of them is more, what's sometimes called an apatheist, more of an apathetic approach to secularism that is common, I think, in sort of the second generation. A lot of times you have the parents who were out there on the barricades fighting for these cultural changes and that sort of thing, and achieving certain success. And then the kids come along, whether they are African-American, next generation, or daughters of feminists who were active in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, who turn to their parents and say, why is it always about gender with you? Or why is it always about race with you? And
right.
For our kids, it's, a lot of times I'll get, why the focus, why are you so focused on religion and the problems with religion? And that's a good sign. We think of it as an aggravating thing because they're sort of more detached from it, but they're actually able to be more detached from it, in part because their peers are giving them a different interface with religion than we often had growing up. My son, coming up through high school, he's 23 now, but oh my gosh. I don't think I've said that out loud.
Take a stiff drink there.
Yeah, he didn't used to be.
Yeah.
But he had friends who were religious, and they're religious in a much less in-your-face way, a much more coexistent way. And I think that sort of big picture change is not everywhere. It's not everybody, but it's becoming much more common for there to be a more desirable interface in that generation and the generation that's coming up behind them between kids who are religious and kids who are not. And that's a fun thing to watch.
And don't you think there's also more recognition when people are using religion to justify something harmful than in the old days?
Oh gosh, yes.
They used religion to justify slavery. Everyone was like, oh, okay. Now, when you see evangelicals get up there and say, yeah, everything Trump is doing is wonderful, everyone kind of recognizes it as complete BS.
Yeah, including religious people. This is the thing that was the missing piece before. There was a fantastic survey, it's probably been about 5 years ago now, but it was a survey of college freshmen. And they asked for, what word comes to mind when you think of religion, was one of the questions that they had. And it was something like 67% said hypocritical and 45% said anti-gay and so on. And this was primarily religious kids. The majority it matched the population roughly. These were religious kids saying, yeah, when I think of religion, my own religion, anti-gay is one of the first things that comes to mind. Hypocritical is one of the first things that comes to mind. So I agree. There's less willingness to just let it pass by without comment. The whole thoughts and prayers thing. I mean,
wow.
What, 5, 6, 7 years ago, never heard somebody saying that out loud. And now it's very common to have people say, knock it off. That's an inadequate response. Do something. That's great. Yeah, it's a different time.
Yeah. I would like to agree with you. I have, my in-laws are thoroughly entrenched in ways that you and I think of as being horse and buggy. It's in my face very often whenever I interact with them. I love them all. They are dear people. They all mean well. They're all good people. But they all hold those beliefs that we all pretty much are appalled at, that Trump is just, he's just saying something silly again, and he's sent here by God. And everything comes back to Jesus, and thoughts and prayers are worth something, and being gay is wrong, and drugs are bad, okay? Just really very, very in my face. I never am able to lose sight of how much work there is to do. I feel like being in the Atheist Community of Austin, it is such an amazing community here. It's very easy to lose sight of that part of the world. I think for most of the people who are around me, I need everybody to keep their feet on the ground, man, because we still have a hell of a long way to go. The fact that Trump,
true.
It's very disheartening because it's having a very big impact on my family personally. Right now, my brother-in-law is here in town visiting. He's a lovely person, but there are topics we simply have to stay away from. It's not that we personally don't mind discussing difficult topics. I can talk about darn near anything with anybody, but there's no reasoning there, and that's just too hard for us to cope with.
2 days ago, a relative of my wife's called me a bottom feeder on online.
Holy cats!
Spewing garbage and that sort of thing.
Wow.
My optimism is generational. It's demographic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's our generation and the generation above us. The older generation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's still absolutely rampant.
Mm-hmm.
What is surprising me is how rapidly that change is setting into the next couple of generations. That's the one. So that demographically, it's coming, and it's going to be a matter of us getting out of the way as much as anything.
Right. And you have talked, Dale, about being there as that safety net, that community for those who are abandoning religion. And I'd like to talk about that in a second. But I also want to, again, drag your feet back onto the ground. All of my relatives, there are cousins and grandkids and so forth. They're my age and younger, and all the way down to little guys and gals. They all believe the exact same thing. I still despair often because they are very much still in there, and I worry for their kids, because what if one of their kids is different, non-normative in any way?
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, whenever there's an ideology that is forced on young people, and I have to kind of balk whenever I hear people use terms like well-intentioned or hearts in the right place kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is very unpopular. And there may be people ready to call in and just, give me a lot of grief about this, but I feel like we really need to be focused on the impact that people's choices have on younger people. And yes, you can say that they meant well, and that can be fine, all well and good, but you cannot just leave it at that without acknowledging the impact that adults have on children.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're talking about these kinds of things where there's some ideology which really is so based in based in a lack of ethics or racism or misogyny or what have you.
Yeah.
Without communicating that to children in a way that gives them some kind of intellectual autonomy in adopting it for themselves or not, without giving them a true choice. I dedicated my book to children who were denied the right to question. That really applies to any kind of ideology, whether it's the Westboro Baptist Church, whether it's, Trump supporters that are just feeding their kids the same kind of like forced spoonful after spoonful. And that we've talked about this in our previous shows in terms of, how do we communicate our belief systems or lack thereof. So, I just feel like in general, adults just have to be so much more careful and honor this responsibility they have in raising their kids, and to really try to recognize when they're being exploitive and doing it for themselves, as opposed to coming from a place of awareness and education about child development and how what they're doing might impact their children's lives.
But see, the thing is with people like my relatives, I love them. Please, nobody ever say that I don't love them and think the world of them. They have been indoctrinated into thinking that all of those things that you think are ideal are evil, because they're going to bring you away from Christ. They're going to take you away from what's going to get you into heaven. And heaven is the whole point of everything. So they're never going to get there. When I do push the limits, they have listened. So they're willing to learn some. And I think one of the things that Matt Dillahunty says all the time that is very true is to be out as an atheist, be out as a person who thinks that racism is not okay, be out as a feminist and so forth, because then you can have those conversations more easily. The fact that I am out about all those things, when Claire says in front of all of my husband's relatives that, using that word's not cool, they've come to kind of expect it. They're conditioned to understand that I'm going to have those conversations. So you either need to behave yourself around me, or be ready to hear a little bit, at least a little bit. But they've been set up to be immune to those things like education and open-mindedness and stuff, because it's poison to them. It's going to take away their religion as far as they're concerned. That's what they've been taught. We do have a couple of callers. Shall we go to callers for a little bit? Y'all, are you ready for that?
Sure, yeah.
All righty. I'm going to start with Pinesnack, who is from the United Kingdom. Let me... Pinesnack, can you hear me? Hello? Pinesnack?
This is the wrong one.
It's the wrong one?
Well,
Pinesnack, can you hear me?
Hi guys, how you doing?
Oh, hi. I pushed the wrong button. Hi. You're on with Claire, Dale, and Jan, Parenting Beyond Belief. Did you have a question for us?
Yeah, I kind of need some help.
Mm-hmm.
I've got children who go to a state school where it's not meant to be affiliated with any religious group. However, they force the children and punish them if they don't to morning assemblies full of hymns and prayer and things like that. I took it to the school and it says they know better, so I should just mind my own business and let them get on with their jobs. My ex-wife was no help, told me not to rock the boat, and when I went to the local authority, I found it was people with strong religious convictions and weren't willing to do anything to help me. I just wondered if there was any way you could suggest that I approach it, whether it's I phrase it different way to the school or to the local authority. I'm kind of at wit's end about it.
Dale, you have excellent experience in this.
It broke up just a little bit when you were describing it. Are you talking about corporal punishment in the school?
No, it's loss of privileges.
Okay.
Like
if they pray, or they're required to pray.
If they refuse to pray during the assemblies on Friday afternoons, they get an extra half-hour break. They're only at primary school as well. And if they don't pray during the week, they lose this playtime, which is meant to be a reward for good behaviour.
And is it a Church of England? It's not a Church of England school.
No, just a run-of-the-mill state.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I have a lot of experience with schools in the U.S. and, the various, I can speak in terms of the legal rights that the child has, what the policies are for public schools and so on. I'm not immediately able to speak in terms of the UK, except to say that that's aggravating and wrong-headed. The thing that I've often found here that may be true there as well is if you can get a hold of the policies of the school and the district, national policies, frequently you'll be able to find out that they are violating their own rules. And it's something that often happens over the course of time just because it's a practice that they fall into. And then you can uncover frequently in black and white an extremely clear policy that says, for example, a parallel in the United States is this requirement to stand for the pledge. I live in Atlanta, a relatively conservative area. And my daughter was told, for example, she was sitting for the pledge and she had an adult in the room who happened to be an IT person, not the teacher, but he came up to her and said, you don't need to say the pledge, but you are required by law to stand for it, which is not true. And when she brought this home, she said, she asked me, is that true? Is it true that I'm required to stand for it? And I said, I don't know. Look it up, try to find out. And it took her 5 minutes to find the district policy in our own district that clearly and specifically said that she didn't need to stand, and to find the Supreme Court case that was relevant, 1947, West Virginia versus Barnett, I think it was. And she was then able to have this when the issue came up again. I would suggest looking for that. for this issue. There's very frequently there's going to be some kind of clear statement of the rights of the kids, and you'll be able to pull that out and surprise everyone, because a lot of times those who are violating it don't even know that they're violating their own policies.
Yeah,
I mean, I have done that to a degree. And for state schools, they're meant to be non-partisan. They're meant to go across the board. And when I asked them about this, they says, well, we don't know anyone that does that, although there are religious leaders in my hometown that would be perfectly willing to go and do the morning prayers of different denominations one day a week.
Yeah, everybody else is doing it.
Right.
I'll tell you what happened in Texas when people pushed back against the prayer in school is they turned it into, quote, a moment of silence, unquote, which is a thinly veiled attempt to they're still praying. And my kids have to put up with that. They say, oh, you can meditate or think about your day or whatever. And it's just hogwash. So be ready for them to go to that. If they do back away from prayer, they'll say, oh, we'll have a moment of silence instead. And so your kid will have to stand there and put up with that. But you may not be able to change this, but for me, the important thing would be to talk to my kid about it. The notion that the play time is a reward for, quote, good behavior, and the natural extension of that is if you're not praying, you're not a good kid.
Right.
Talk about that, certainly. You're clearly a good kid, and it has nothing to do with whether you pray or not. And if they have this silly system, know that I see it for what it is, and you're not bad and wrong. And then see if they can't. Sometimes what works for me when we come up with, because here in Texas we have a lot of these religious things going on in school. If you put the problem in the hands of the person who's giving you the problem, say, okay, so my kid doesn't want to do this, and I don't feel like she should have to do this. What do we do? Put it in their lap. And if they insist that she stands and prays, boy, I would be very surprised that they would do that.
If they do, I completely agree with that. That's where you start. And if they do, you go one step higher. This is what I've, in the U.S., that's typically the principal of the school. And more often than not, the principal actually is better informed on policy than the classroom teachers are. Classroom teachers are very busy with the day-to-day. The principal will immediately see the situation and more often than not make a correction, especially if it is a violation of policy.
The principal's the one that leads the assembly.
Oh, then I'd go a step higher. I mean, if you go up into the I don't know if you're organized into districts in the same way, but there is typically a point at which someone administratively is going to see that this is an issue, even if it isn't a violation of policy. And one of the things that can be very helpful is to not frame it as an atheist issue, that this isn't about secular people. This is about religious diversity and the fact that in your school, there are likely to be a lot of people for whom this prayer is not a good fit. You know, that there are going to be people who are Hindu and Muslim and Jewish and so on. And you're trying to create a situation where everyone has the right to abstain from something that isn't the right fit.
One other thing that I would like to ask you is, what sort of child is your child? There are some children that would be like, yeah, Mom and Dad, let's push this. And then there are some kids that would say, I really don't want to deal with that. Can we just lay low? Where does your child fall on this?
To be honest, we are the trust authority. So if a teacher or someone like that says, God is real, you must believe him or you go to hell, chances are he may believe it. I mean, there's 3 ranging from 4 up to 10. Mm-hmm. So they generally trust authority when they tell it. And I have had one of the elders come on and say, why don't we go to church? We're meant to go to church. It's a sin. Yeah. And I had to sit him down, go through him why we particularly don't. And it actually led to a good thing, because then we started going to local mosque, Buddhist temple. We even travelled a bit to go to our closest Jewish temple.
That's
so
pretty
we'd learn
brilliant
more.
right there. That's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, that's really good.
So he is interested in learning about more faiths now, but at the time it was taught to him as if it's true. It was around coming up to Easter, so they were doing all the Easter nativities and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So thankfully, we've opened his mind to that a bit more, to actually question it, and we're giving him the tools to decide what faith, if any, he wants later on in life.
Spot on. So do you feel like his social skills would be good enough to handle this sort of rocking the boat?
He goes through the motions more to the point.
Okay.
Because conforming's easier than the outcome if he didn't.
Yeah.
Which I'm not particularly happy with, but if that's the way he wants to deal with it,
at the
then
age,
I'll find that.
Yeah, at the age he's at, it might not be the time to just make a stand. It can be a hard thing to be that one kid,
Yeah.
Jan, were you trying to say something?
I missed whether this is a private school or like a government public school.
It's public, basically.
Nearly all schools in the UK are state, to all intents and purposes.
Okay. And you say that you had looked into the policies that Dale was referring to?
Yeah, I looked into it briefly, and there's nothing particularly restricting them as long as they're not focused directly on one faith, because it's not partially funded by any religion.
Right. Well, I think what Claire said is true. Ultimately, you want the child to guide the decision. And if he is uncomfortable with the confrontation, or he'd rather go along or something like that, I really do think it's okay to let that happen. And there's actually I have found some value in letting the child experience being in a situation where they are compelled to do something that goes against their beliefs. And then they can see what that feels like. They can it can help them clarify their own values. And it could be that the child develops the willingness to stand up to it.
It can be a tremendous teachable experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Teachable moment.
To actually, to process that, to be sitting there day after day. This was really part of the pledge thing with my youngest, is that, she just kind of thought about it every single day, standing up and saying this weird, it wasn't even the under God thing. It's just this weird, nationalistic, you are required to say that you pledge your allegiance. And at some point she just said, you know what, I'm sitting down today. But it was all that. It would have been much weaker for me to be the one to say, don't you think the pledge is weird? And just kind of intervene in that way. Instead, it was something that developed in her over time. And she finally that experience led her to make a decision, and then to see what that felt like. I think all that kind of experience is good.
And I wanted to mention that I had kind of a similar experience, but I wanted to get clear because I was having a little trouble hearing. Did you say that your child is 10 or younger?
I have 3 children, 4, 6, and 10.
Okay, I understand now. Okay. I have had some success where if a school was doing something that they were doing something I didn't approve of for my child, and it was kind of a similar thing as a Pledge of Allegiance. They were having all the children sing this song before they ate, and it was really not something they would have fully understood what they were singing, or that they had a choice in whether they felt, all the words in this song. And I really felt it was a bit exploitive. And I ended up not having to kind of make a big stink about it, or even having my child even know that I was having this communication with the administration. But all I did was just voice my concern by sending an email to the right people. In your case, if you, and maybe you've already done this, but if you do have the policies there that say that there needs to be recognition of all faiths, sometimes just presenting an email that has that policy to back up what you're saying and sending it to a number of people who are, I don't know the setup here, but whoever might be above the principal, copying the principal, a teacher, or whoever might be involved, and just kind of having that take place so that they can see they're being watched, that it's just sometimes people need to see that just because there's, no one saying something, that there are actually people that feel that it doesn't feel right. And so I just think sometimes that can over time kind of nudge people a little bit to change their policies, or I should say their procedures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is good advice, especially if I have to take it even further than that.
Yeah.
Because the next step is going to the local authority properly, but they're generally heavily religious people of many faiths. But thinking about it, there is many faiths at this school, so maybe actually taking it to them properly might help that, because would a Muslim person want their child praying to Jesus Christ our Lord, or whatever the term you want to use?
Mm-hmm. And
that can be really helpful.
That might be.
And sending that and having that record that you made that attempt to communicate, whether you got a response back or not, that's extremely important to show that you first made an attempt to directly communicate with them. The other thing I would say is, if you can form a coalition with any other parents who have an issue with this, whether they are Christian, whether they're not Christian, just to strengthen numbers.
Yeah, the problem with the UK, at least, is there's indifference towards religion. Yes, they were Christians, so technically they're
ironic
Christians. Yeah, and they just don't care. They go to church, Remembrance Sunday, and that's pretty much it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of different to the US, where there is a strong religious presence.
Yeah, I'm kind of familiar with that, having given a lot of talks in the UK. I think that, though, there are those individuals who are finding a safe place in the woodwork and just don't feel like, at all safe, or that it's comfortable to speak out in any way. So sometimes you have to try to find those individuals in ways by whether it's, attending some sort of atheist group function or something like that. It may take a little bit of detective work.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I've already contacted them to bring the ACA over to the UK at some point, but yeah, still waiting to hear back. I
really appreciate your courage in trying to find a remedy here. If I were in your position, I would find it really distressing. So I'm sorry you're having to go through that.
Yeah.
No, I don't mind the religious teachings. It's a case I would prefer the diversity to teach about all faiths.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like even if the school drops that ball, you've got it under control. And sometimes that's the best we can do as parents. The science education in Texas, as the world found out, was very much under attack a few years ago. And I always felt like, well, at least my kids will be okay because I'm a biologist by training. And so you have to be that safety net for them. It sounds like you're doing that. I hope this helped some. Yeah, it does. I mean, the ACA in general has really helped me. They've opened my eyes to other forms of discussing faith as just a religious person screaming at you that you're wrong. Right.
So, yeah, I'm indebted to the ACA.
To sort that, are you in touch at all with the Freedom from Religion Foundation?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so
I've only recently found out they exist, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Well, I actually don't know, and maybe Dale or Claire may know if they have done any kind of work outside of the U.S., but even if they have only filed lawsuits within the U.S., their knowledge base is amazing. And so you may want to get in touch with them. Their attorneys do nothing but file lawsuits that relate to these kinds of issues that are basically calling, holding the feet to, making religious institutions that are violating the law and holding them accountable. And so they have had a lot of experience with that for years and years in the U.S. They may have some advice for you as well outside the U.S.
Right on.
Well, thanks for the tip.
Well, thank you for so much for calling, and we wish you all sorts of luck in dealing with this. And, call back if you have some sort of result, either good or bad. We'd be curious to find out how this turns out.
Well, I'll keep the team updated because I'm on Discord anyway. So
that'd be great.
I just want to quickly say thank you to ACA, thank you to the three of you for being helpful and giving people this outlet.
Sure. Thank you so much for finding the ACA and your support from the other side of the world.
Yeah, and your story, I'm sure, would be quite helpful for others to hear. So thank you.
Right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
That was kind of amazing. That was really interesting to get the perspective from another country.
Yeah, one where they don't really care much about religion. However,
and that presents a problem. Isn't that interesting? It's true.
It's like, when I was giving talks over there and they were talking about the government and they were saying, we are way more secular in practice than the U.S., but then they have all these religious leaders who are leading parliament. And so it was this double-edged sword, and I couldn't really decide which system I would have preferred. Is it better to have it on paper or better to have it in practice?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Wow. Exactly what you said, Dale. Just, wow. What an interesting pickle. We have another caller, and let's try that one out. Janet?
Hey.
Hey.
How you doing, Claire?
I'm good, and you?
I'm just great.
Yeah. Well, do you have a question for us?
I don't necessarily have a question as much as I want to get some input, I guess, on how you would handle something. My kids are older. They're 20 and 18 now. And I was maybe a little bit of an unconventional parent because of the way that I chose to raise them. For example, kids these days are getting their iPhones at, 6, 7, 8 years old. And I also gave my kids phones when they were younger, but it wasn't an iPhone. But I gave them phones when they were younger. And, I set expectations from the beginning. And the unconventional part comes in of I set the expectations, and I gave them a lot of independence and leeway on following what I told them to do. I was never one of those parents who, went and checked their iPads, their computers, their phones, to make sure that they weren't doing the things I told them was unsafe to do. But one of the ways that I accomplished that was before I would let them have the phone, or before I would give them their first laptop, I took them to a cyber, class where they learned about cyber threats, and they learned about people who would try to get into their heads, try to catfish them, just different kinds of threats. And I don't really see a whole lot of that with either my peers or my nieces and nephews who are now having kids. They tend to be okay, I'm going to give you this, but I'm going to monitor the hell out of it. And I kind of think, I've always thought that was basically saying, I'm going to give you this, but I don't really trust you. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go the route of I'm going to give you this. I'm going to tell you, the rules, the reason why those rules exist, and then I'm going to trust you. And in my case, it worked very well. I guess I'm wanting to hear your experiences with that and what you recommend. Because, like, for example, my daughter, I gave her first, she got an iMac when she was, I think about 12. And we took her to the class. They told her about all the things that could possibly happen with people approaching her online. And then, I told her what she could and she couldn't do, if these certain things happened, she was to tell me. And sure enough, probably 6 months after she got the computer, she came to me and she said, "Mom, I think there's something that you need to look into. I was approached by someone who said that he was my age." And she goes, "And now after talking to me, he's told me he's really 38. And I'm like, okay. And I said, "Well, what has he said?" And she showed me. And at the time, you could tell that this guy was building to gaining her trust, to more and more trying to get to the point where she trusted him enough to do things that, you could tell it was like at first it was very innocent, and then it got a little bit more and more intimate as they go along. So, of course, handle that situation, explain to her the dangers and everything. But my initial thought was always, if I tell them what the expectations are, I tell them the dangers, make them fully aware of what the things that can happen, and then trust that they'll do the right thing, And in my case, it absolutely worked.
Yeah.
So I guess I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, information is power. Jan, you want to start, or Dale?
Dale, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm applauding you.
That's some secular parenting going on right there.
It is so great what you did, what you described.
And by the way, I was in the religion at the time when I had my kids. I was actually still a quote unquote Christian when they were. I have only been an out atheist for 4 years. So
yeah, secularity must have been written on your heart.
Yeah, right, and that's fine, and that doesn't even matter necessarily. There are a lot of religious parents who are raising their kids according to the same principles. The way it's typically separated out in the parenting literature is the difference between authoritative and authoritarian parenting. Mm-hmm. Those are the two models that are most often described. And the research is extremely clear on this. The authoritative model is the one that you want to pursue. That's when the parents are affectionate and engaged with the child, but they set limits and they enforce consequences. They use reason and logic and appropriate negotiation, so that just like you said, you say, "Here's what I want you to do. Here's my request. Here's the reason for it," and then you trust. That doesn't necessarily mean that they won't mess up.
Right.
They may or may not make the right decision, but by trusting them, you're establishing a relationship between the two of you that ends up paying off in the long run. Because what happened when your daughter got the feeling something was up with this guy and he's 38 years old and something's wrong? She came to you and she described it to you. What happens when you have parents in the authoritarian model, which has that emotional distance and because I said so and all that sort of thing, is that, and monitoring the child and checking up on them, the child learns to hide things. They learn to not share.
That's exactly what I didn't want.
Exactly. You do not want that. And what you also get with that, and I saw this in my peers, my kids saw it in their peers, is as soon as a child who's been raised in that authoritarian state growing up goes away to college, and what happens? They completely go bananas. They very frequently bust up because
my best friend from high school. It's exactly what she did. Right. She was never allowed to do anything.
Yeah, and it's natural. It makes sense that once they're on their own, they don't know how to make those judgments. They haven't learned how to make those judgments. That's why we moved from Minneapolis to Atlanta 11 years ago. And one of the differences we noticed immediately is that the Atlanta schools are much more authoritarian in terms of behavior control. The way kids walk down the hall, the amount of talking that's allowed at lunch, there are all these restrictions on them and, immediate harsh consequences if someone breaks the rule. And as a result, the kids are rarely allowed to actually make judgments. They're rarely allowed to develop their own judgment about right and wrong. Instead, they are simply conforming to a set of draconian rules that are, with somebody pointing a finger in the face all the time. But what happens as soon as you get outside of that that regime is that you don't know how to control yourself. You don't actually have the developed behavioral judgment that's going to serve you in the long run. So I just think it's scary. The whole internet thing is
it really
concerning.
is.
It really
it's not
is.
that I didn't want to know what they were doing. It's just that I wanted them to feel like they didn't have to prove to me. Like I wanted them to not only feel like I trusted them, but I wanted them to know they could trust me.
Oh, absolutely.
That I wasn't
That's
going
exactly
to
right.
snoop through everything that they were doing. And, my daughter, keeps a journal where she writes and she also draws, and I love her drawings. And she will bring me her journal and she'll show me, what she's put in there. And, she's 18, and that's just something you don't really hear of very much, that somebody, at that age is still willing to, come to their parent and share, things that they wrote down, that's intimate to them, and especially at that age. And she's, she came to me 2 years ago, and this is, kind of maybe a little bit of an overshare for the program, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway. And she was crying, and I said, what's wrong? And she's like, I got to talk to you. And she's just like bawling her eyes out. And I'm like, what's wrong? You can tell me anything. And she's like, yeah. And she's like, but I'm scared. I'm like, you're scared of what? And she's like, I don't want you to see me differently. And she didn't have a word for it. She didn't know what the word for it was at the time, but she basically declared that she was gender fluid. And sometimes she felt like a girl, sometimes she didn't feel like a girl, sometimes she felt like a boy, sometimes she didn't feel like a boy, and she didn't understand it. She didn't know what it was. And she didn't even know the word for it. She's crying because she's like, I don't know what to do with these feelings. And I said, I love you no matter what. I was like, and we will figure it out. I said, I'm going to go ask some people that I think would know, and I will figure it out. And I literally read up on everything I could possibly find. And ACA helped me out with that, by the way. There were a couple of people in the group who just gave me resources. So, and I read up on it, and I went back to her and I said, okay, here's what I found out. Here's the name for it. Let's, find a counselor who will support you. And then, you can, involve me as much as you want, or, disinvolve me as much as you want. And, from that day on, she's never cried about it again. So it's those kinds of things. I think that trust is set from toddler, or maybe even before toddler. But you have to, if you want your children to come to you with those kinds of things, you have to show them not only that you trust them, but that they can trust you.
That's exactly right. It's so great. I love to hear stories like that. It's not a coincidence that she came to you. Mm-hmm. That's not a coincidence. That's a result of the particular kind of parenting you did.
Yeah.
Hearing how you've chosen to interact with your child. I remember when I was with just observing a family, and the kids were all teenage years, and just an interaction between them and their parents was so beautiful. It was really.
We're losing you, Jan.
Oh, okay.
So, okay. Yeah, I also had the talk,
I'll get off and then try to come back on.
Yeah. Are you back?
I'll get off and come back on.
Okay. When I let my kids start using the internet on their own, I also pre-educated them about what's out there. And I did not have a class. It never occurred to me that there would be a class on such a thing, but that's brilliant.
Yeah, usually most of the local police stations, I have found this true in Ohio and in Florida, because I relocated to Florida, and both of them had courses at the local police station. So you may want to check that out as a resource, see if that's still available. But I found them rather easily.
Well, good. It just didn't even occur to me to look for it. I thought I would do all the educating because I guess I'm arrogant like that. But
That's where you and I differ, Claire. I know I don't know anything.
No, I think I know too much. So
I will try to find someone who does.
Yeah. One of the things that I was concerned about is I trust my kids. I absolutely trust them. And again, like you, Janet, we have that sort of relationship where they'll come and tell me stuff that most kids probably don't. But one thing that I was concerned about was, okay, so I trust them. I don't trust other people. And what those sorts of people do is somehow convince the child that they are the exception, that something about this thing is an exception. And so one of the things that I said to them over and over again ad nauseum was, you are not the exception. You are not the exception. This person, I don't care how they get into your life, whatever, if there's a red flag, you are not the exception. So, yeah.
I mean, that's funny that you bring that because the same child, she, from the time she was in preschool, the teacher wanted to hold her back because they said she acted, quote unquote, weird. And it was because she didn't want to interact with the other kids. She wanted to crawl around on the floor during playtime and act like a cat. Mm-hmm. She liked cats. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, it's like, is she bothering anybody? Is she not engaging? Is she acting in a way? Is she not doing her work? No, the answers were no. I'm like, then why are we holding her back? Mm-hmm. I was like, just because she doesn't want to play the same conventional way all the other kids play. But to this day, she hates to be called weird. If she does anything that's not, quote unquote, the norm, if you call her weird, she'll start crying. She doesn't want to hear the word weird. And I think it was because that teacher pointed out to her that she was so different than the other kids when she was so young. Mm-hmm. Because ever since that time, she just doesn't like, that's what she wants to fit in. Yeah. She doesn't want to, stand out like, she's just now getting to the point, like I said, she's 18, where she's okay with not exactly fitting in with everybody. And, she's okay with standing out, especially if it's in relation to standing up for other people. Yeah. Like she's the first one standing up with the Parkland kids. She's the first one who wanted to go to the Orlando, shooting, candlelight vigil. I mean, she's the first one who wants to do those things. She doesn't care if it's, fits in with everybody else. Right. But for herself, she still struggles with that, I think. Right. And I really do think it was negativity from people she looked up to. Mm-hmm.
All right, is anyone able to hear me? Maybe I'm still...
I can hear you, Jan.
Yeah,
you're back.
Clear.
You're back.
Yeah.
Well, I've really loved so much of what you've said, Janet. And I think that last story in particular really highlights what I feel so many adults don't get. Dale mentioned earlier about authoritarian parenting, and I think that one huge mistake that people make who are proponents of that is so much of their decision-making about children has to do with appearances. So, for example, they will say, well, that's a good child because the child is quiet, compliant, fitting in, doing what all the adults basically want the child to do because it's convenient for the adults. And what so many people miss about, and I'll just give you another example, is like when I would, every time just about, I have told anybody that I have a great relationship with my child, and this was like when she was, say, 10, 11, 12, I always would hear, she's 50 now, people would say, just you wait,
Yeah.
Oh, I heard that too.
Yeah.
I heard that too. And they're 20 and 18, and I still have a terrific relationship with both of them. Thank you.
Of course, there's sometimes chemical imbalances that you address, but
of course,
for the most part, we really need to let go of this stupid fallacy that just because children do have some need to really,
individuate.
Yeah, and express themselves and define who they are and that kind of thing. And sometimes that can show up as seeming rebellious, that is not a mold. And, the idea that appearances, same with your gender fluid child, that should be dictating things. It's so important to recognize when adults are jumping into that pot of, it has to look a certain way, when in fact the question is not, do you have a good child? It should be, do you have a content and happy child?
Happy child. I say that all the time. I was like, I don't, and they'll say, they're like, Mom, I feel like, I'm not making you proud of me because, they've not done as well on their SATs or whatever as they expected. I'm like, there's nothing you can do that would make you mean not proud of you as long as you're happy and you're not harming anyone. I was like, as long as you're happy and you're not harming anyone, then I'm happy with you. I'm proud of you, and there's nothing else I want. That's it.
Right on.
You're giving your child so many awesome tools, and just to be able to
I just got to tell you guys though, because I come from a family of there's 7 kids in my family, and I'm the only atheist, and my brothers and sisters hate how they call it lenient I was with my children.
Yeah.
And the expectations are so different when you come from the Christianity, part of it, that like one of my brothers, on my niece's wedding day, she kept saying, well, she deserves to wear white. She deserves to wear white. And I finally turned to him and I was like so angry. And I'm like, can you shut up? I was like, it's just weird. Yeah. I was like, it's just weird that you're sitting there bragging about your daughter's virginity.
I'm
like, it's just weird.
Ew.
I mean, I was like, you're literally, that's what you're doing. And I was like, no one needs to know that, right? So my family has these things in their head that their way of forcing, authoritative is exactly what it is, of forcing these biblical and social norms onto their children is the way to go. And what it makes them do is it makes the children unhappy. It makes them extremely unhappy.
There's 3 forms of parenting. There's the authoritarian, and then on the opposite end,
authoritarian,
passive parenting. Okay, and both of them.
I'm sorry, what was that?
For children. And so a lot of times what you'll hear from people who opt more for the authoritarian, and they're like, if you don't do it this way, then the kids are going to go wild. And they really are talking then about passive parenting, which is not what secular or liberal or healthy minded parents are trying to do, that they are warning about something and it's really not worth warning about, because that's not what you're aiming for.
Right.
Right. And I mean, just like with him, he's sitting there bragging about his daughter and who's 19. And I took my kids to, Planned Parenthood, because they also, just for anyone listening, they also offer a 1-day class in sexual education that you can take your child to. I took my kids as soon as they hit 12 years old to the 1-day class and said, okay, they're going to teach you everything you need to know about safe sex. And then as soon as they got out of the class, I'm like, okay, now you know everything that you need to know. And I mean, I had already talked to them about it a little bit, but I wanted them to have definite answers in a way where they could ask questions that weren't uncomfortable to ask mom. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, so afterwards, I told them, I'm like, okay, so what you need to know from me is, if you meet a boy or a girl and you decide that you want to have sex, then you need to come to me and I will make sure that you have protection. I was like, there will be no questions, there'll be no judgment, you just let me know.
Right.
And I can honestly tell you, they've told me that they were the only kid that ever had a parent tell them that. And that makes me incredibly sad.
Yeah. Yeah. Janet, we have one more caller that I'd like to get to, and we're actually a little over time.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Thank you guys
okay. It's
very
good
much
stuff.
For the conversation and the information. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Take care. Jan, do you think you could do one more call?
Yeah.
All right. So this is Aaron. Hello, Aaron.
Hello.
Thank you for waiting on hold for so long. You had a question about exercises to help your children think critically?
Yes. Okay. So I have a science background. Isn't really here nor there, but the question I had was this. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I love her very much. And unless it's her idea, she's not going to do the idea. And I know that because she's my daughter and I have the same trait. So I pass that on.
It's also normal for a 4-year-old.
Absolutely. Well, I'm trying to raise her with utilizing the scientific method with everything. We do little science experiments around the house. I'm always asking her questions to think about it. But I've been thinking about this ever since she was born, but lately because we just came from a nephew's birthday party. And I'm wondering when she's older and she can understand more the context of conversations and just whether direct questioning or just passive-aggressive statements that family members who are theists make about us, who my wife and I are both atheists. What kind of exercises can I go with her to demonstrate? I mean, because I don't want to just tell her, look, this is what I think. I don't believe that there's a God. I need to let her arrive to that conclusion. But I can't give her the same types of discussions that I give to my theist friends when I get in these discussions. I mean, I'm not going to start talking to her about Pascal's wager right off the bat. I'm
Right.
4.
There's a great book you should buy. It's called Parenting Beyond Belief. That'll help a lot. Yeah. So, Dale, do you want to start in?
Oh, I certainly do.
I bet you do.
Yeah, and actually, even more than Parenting Beyond Belief, Raising Freethinkers is one that has a lot of very specific ideas for what you're talking about. But what I'd say in general is one of the things that you want to instill in kids from the very earliest possible age, which I can guarantee you're already doing, is curiosity about the world. It's when you really break down the difference between a religious and a non-religious worldview, it frequently comes down to the difference between a curious and an essentially incurious worldview, the one that is accepting a comforting set of conclusions because they're afraid to, explore other possibilities. But if you have a child who is genuinely curious about the world from the very beginning, they want to know what's real, right? That's the foundation that you need for everything that comes later. That's the foundation for scientific thinking, for critical thinking, for empathy, frankly. Curiosity is the root of empathy because you're curious about how someone else feels, the way the world looks to someone else. So the way to start it is with a two-part approach. You say, wow, and then you say, why? So you step outside and you say, wow, look at the color of the sky, at sunset or something like that. And you say, I wonder why it's that color. And you don't even need to immediately get to the answer. You don't even need to go into the whole refraction of light thing and all that. But you just start to introduce, I remember walking down the sidewalk and we saw a roly-poly or a pill bug, or everybody calls it something different, on the sidewalk. And my daughter touched it and it rolled up like a ball. And I said, wow, it was amazing because it just instantly did it. And I just said, I wonder why it does that. And then she might have hypothesized. We might have moved immediately on to something else. But the thing is, if you start to pair wonder and why right from the beginning, that wow reaction, and then the next step, which is the implication that there's an answer, right? Even if we don't immediately know the answer. You want kids to see that it is possible to ask questions and figure out what the world is like. Gradually, as you start to get at the real answers, they start to see that the world is kind of amazing. That it's when you actually get the real understanding of what a rainbow is, for crying out loud. There's a really wonderful, terrible poem by who was it? Keats. About that Newton unwove the rainbow, right? Richard Dawkins talks about this. He turned it into something very dull in the catalog of things because now we understand that it's refracted light. Well, that's completely the opposite. The rainbow reveals that all of the colors are bound up tightly in white light, and that we can refract that light through a billion drops of vapor in the air and reveal the colors that are inside the white light. I mean, that is so much better than this is a thing that God put in the sky as a promise that he wouldn't drown everybody again. So I really think that ultimately that curiosity, if you can keep that in mind, you don't even have to think about specific, the exercises will produce themselves. You know, those kind of things will produce themselves. The other thing that I frequently did with my kids is I messed with them. You know, you can toy around with them to get their critical thinking going. Like when my daughter came to me when she was 6 or something like that and said, "How far away is the sun?" And I said, "About 20 feet or 21 feet. They're not quite sure." You know, something like that. And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, what do you think it is?" And we started the conversation that way. So they actually got to the point where their baloney detectors were tightly, you know, tuned to me because they knew that Dad would mess with them. And that's a good thing, you know, that they would actually be skeptical about the things that I say. I became the model for the rest of the world in not always telling that when we talk about, I will always tell my children the truth. I will never lie to my children. I think that's a mistake. I think you should playfully, you know, you don't want to show them that there is anyone in the world who will always tell them the truth. There are no absolute authorities, including me. I want you to always be thinking about what's real and about what's true and using your mind in that way. And it's aggravating eventually because they start to question, even when I'm not kidding, they start to question what I'm saying. But ultimately, that's the way you want them to be, and that's the exercise.
I have done exactly what you're saying, Dale, and I've also want to add in one little thing, and that is that sometimes it depends on the kid what you can do. Yeah. My son was wired up such that he wanted the answers. He somehow knew the answers were there, and what he would require was for me to give the paragraph's answer. He was not the kid that would cut me off after a couple of sentences. He wanted to know everything that I knew about something, and then when I got to the end of that, that's when we'd go research. Yeah. So it depends on the kid. And another thing that for every kid is different, but when I was a little kid, I loved dinosaurs just like most kids love them today, but there wasn't the stuff around that we have now. So I have had the good fortune of having both children that I have loving dinosaurs, so I got to live dinosaur paraphernalia through them. It was great. But what was I going to say there? My mom, they gave me one book about dinosaurs, I think. So my son was maybe 5, 4, or whatever, and we're looking through a dinosaur book, and I'm teaching him the names of all of them, Parasaurolophus and anything else with millions of syllables in it. And my mother looks over my shoulder and she says, "Oh, you really shouldn't be. That's too complex. You really should just be, like that's a dinosaur, with 4 legs versus 2 legs or something silly like this." And I was like, "No, right now, language for him is not second nature. It's first nature. Anything that goes into his brain is just going straight in there, and I want to fill it with as many words as I can." So I would never ever stop with a children's book when it comes to a topic that a kid is interested in. Go as deep as they can stand with as big a vocabulary as you can find. And they will suck it up because my kid, even now, can tell me all the dinosaurs. He's 15 now, and it's still all in there. So that's my thoughts on that. Jan?
I couldn't add to anything. I think what you both have said have been just excellent. And I just wonder if our caller just has any thoughts that you would like.
No. So for me, I never once thought that I could help my daughter become more skeptical by feeding her baloney. I think that's a wonderful strategy. I just never considered it.
Yeah.
And I am totally going to start doing that. Like the wheels in my head are turning right now.
It works.
Because it's like, there's another way I can mess with my daughter now.
It's good. It's good stuff.
So, in regards to what you were saying, Claire, you should have seen some of the parents on the playground when my daughter was growing up. They have like this one toy in the public playground where it's this canted. I don't know. It just rotates. The kid just stands on it on the stand. And
the vomit machine. Yeah.
That thing.
Yeah.
Well, like when she first saw it, she was really curious about it, and I stood her on it. And, of course, there's a line because kids all want to, we waited our turn. And when we got on, my daughter asked me, why is it doing this? And I was like, it's because of rotational motion. I explained the physics to her of it.
Right on.
And I knew she wasn't going to understand, but I was doing it for a selfish reason because I was studying for a test. And, I was just, let me just hammer this home. And it's just something I've always done. But, to hear that you did that same exercise and your kids are now 15 and able to recite the full dinosaur names is just encouraging.
Yeah.
And because I thought I was just speaking out just words to the ether and nothing was going to stick. I mean, it was just, I was hoping that something gets in, but...
Yeah, as long as you couch it in what they're doing. Schools have it so wrong. The best way to learn is when it presents itself. And then you give the information and it becomes a seamless part of what's going on in their little noggins. And it sticks. I mean, they lose some stuff, but a lot of it sticks. It's kind of remarkable. So, Aaron, thank you so much
for answering my question.
Oh, really appreciate your call. And enjoy that baby. Yeah. Oh, it's such a good age. Yeah.
Will do.
All right. Take care.
All right. Y'all have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. So we are over time and we need to wrap things up. So I just want to say to everybody watching, parenting is hard. Secular parenting in a religious world, well, that just adds another layer of challenges. Our hope is that this program helps people navigate some of those challenges a little more easily. I want to thank Jan and Dale. Thank you so much. You guys were awesome. And I also want to thank the crew on the other side of the wall where I am anyway, Vern and Mark and anybody else over there, the people you'll see in the credits. Those are the people who really make this show happen. Dale and Jan and I just show up. They're the ones who make all the magic, and I appreciate them more than anything. And now what I want you to do is go hug your kid. Have a great day. Bye.